Interlude Ramona Part 1 Carousel, Carousel. A tilde plus underscore P macron R macron right arrowhead tilde equals pi tilde diaresis left arrowhead L degrees circumflexity 1 degrees left arrowhead right arrowhead 2 degrees. Tilde degrees pipe 1992. The original centennial. Before the continuity loop tilde dash tilde. Ramona Mercer looked over the crowd at the bewitching pavilion. It was mostly families, with lots of young children and cutesy costumes. One little boy in a stroller was dressed as the Edding Swamp Monster, which was said to look like a mutant catfish with spider legs for whiskers. His mother had stuck large, hairy spider legs sprawling out of his stroller, while the stroller's opening looked like the mouth of the jagged-toothed monster itself. Huh? Ramona thought. I guess that means the baby wasn't really dressed as the monster but was being eaten by the creature, a strange choice. Still, very cute. The bigger the children got, the less cute their costumes were. Some of the absolutely least cute children at the pavilion were the teenagers who were throwing popcorn at each other at a table far in the back. Their costumes weren't meant to solicit ahs and oohs, they were meant to scare or even gross out anyone who looked at them. They didn't even have the decency to put effort in. They were just covered in fake blood. Most of them were just wearing street clothes, not real costumes other than the blood and some errant fake guts. Shame. Dressing up on the anniversary of the founding used to be something everyone went all out for when Ramona was a kid. The pavilion was a pitiful sight. It was a glorified food court. It was also loud. Too loud. The venue's weak sound system could not carry over the noise of the crowd and the rides, but Ramona wasn't going to let that stop her. She approached the microphone and yelled, "Welcome to the Carousel Centennial Bewitching Pavilion." There was nothing bewitching about this place other than some tacky streamers. Ramona felt like a fool in her black dress and pointy hat. The fake warts on her nose and cheekbones itched. She was hired to dress like a witch and sing songs for children. Lucky her. Still, when it came down to it, she was going to be able to play her music and pay her bills from it. That was the dream, right? She had forged a patchwork career doing odd jobs around Carousel, working at carnivals, playing music at birthday parties, playing extras in the cheap horror movies made in town, and anything else she could do and still have time to pick her sister up from school. She grabbed her most prized possession, her electric guitar, and took a deep breath. "I'm Ramona, and these are the zombies," she said, pointing to her bandmates behind her. They were not very convincing zombies. One of the few things the venue was clear about was that they needed a cheesy, horror-themed band name, and the rotund gentleman who told her this was very set on it being Ramona and the Zombies. She was embarrassed to even say it. She had begged to make it Ramona and the Corpses or, better yet, just the Zombies so she could leave her name out of it, but no dice. The crowd didn't react. "Ramona Mercer, that is," she said. Suddenly, the crowd was interested. They weren't standing and cheering, but they were at least paying attention. Her last name was well known, even if she wasn't. She then launched into her set. It was just a bunch of her original music augmented with fresh, spooky lyrics for the occasion. Her soulful melody about losing her parents at a young age became a song about a haunted convertible. Her heartfelt ballad to her sister became a song about an evil siren. Her love songs were changed to be about vampires, werewolves, and a mummy's boy who would never choose her. You do what you have to do to make ends meet. The kids loved it. Every time she said some ridiculous line about a vampire not knowing whether to kiss her or drink her blood, or about a werewolf who needed to shave, they laughed like it was the best thing they had ever heard. Between the kids, the parents who were happy because their kids were happy, and the old men who stopped by to ogle, she was really growing a crowd. While she sang, she looked off stage to her sister sat at one of the picnic tables at the pavilion. She was doing her homework. Phoebe Mercer. 16 years old. The only living person Ramona loved completely. Ramona had gotten permission to leave a large tip jar near the entrance of the venue. Experience had taught her to bolt it down and make sure the opening was too small for those damn teenagers to get their hands in. She watched as people generously awarded her their change from buying lunch at the booths in the area. There were more than a few larger denominations being stuffed inside, too. It was all going to be worth it. That is if she didn't claw her face off to get rid of these stupid fake warts. She sang and played her heart out. When her time slot was over, a barbershop quartet with fake slits on their throats was chomping at the bit to get on stage and do their act. "They're all yours," she said as she unplugged her guitar from the venue's system and helped her bandmates carry their instruments down the stairs. Her drummer, Tony, came running over with the tip jar. He held out the tip jar and shook it with great effort while smiling. He wore a ponytail and a graphic t-shirt. Ramona had dated him back in his pre-ponytail days, but they had just been friends for half a decade. "We're eating good tonight," he said. "What are you buying with your share of the treasure, Ramona?" Ramona took the jar and shook it. He wasn't kidding. It was quite a haul. "Rent," she said. Her bass guitarist was off trying to talk an innocent carnival game worker out of her phone number, probably by purposely not mentioning that he was a bass player. Her keyboardist had stayed behind to assist the barbershop quartet with a couple of their songs that had a part for some comedic piano riffs. "You guys were amazing," Phoebe said, carrying her math textbook under one arm. "You had your headphones on the whole time," Tony said, pointing to the metal band and yellow foam pads still around her neck. "That was just so boys wouldn't talk to me," Phoebe said. "And it helped muffle when you tried to play the drums." Tony's eyes dimmed. "Children are so mean. What are they teaching you in schools?" "Rhythm," Phoebe answered back with a smile. Tony grabbed at his heart. "That one hurt. We'll have to get you a tambourine so you can keep me in check," he said. "Ramona, did you hear what happened yesterday?" Ramona, who had been stuffing cables in her guitar bag, absent-mindedly said, "Lots of things happened yesterday." "Which of them are you talking about?" "Jedediah Geist," Tony said. "You hear about this?" Geist, she said, "that name sounds familiar." "Oh, shut up," Tony said. "Jedediah Geist was murdered yesterday." "That was interesting. Why do you look so pleased about that?" Ramona asked with a laugh. "I'm not," Tony said. "It's just, he was the last living Geist. That's a big deal. That's a big name. It's interesting that he died under mysterious circumstances. You know, they have lots of skeletons in their closets." "Tell me," Phoebe asked. "Do people say stuff like that when Mercers die, too?" She wasn't being playful. Her mother's last name was Mercer, and her death had generated its own rumors. Tony shifted into damage control. "No," he said. "I mean, there are no more Mercers, except for you guys. I mean, I don't say stuff like that. People might say you're cursed, but I don't because I think it's bad. It's bad to do." "Nice recovery," Ramona said. She wrapped Phoebe up in a hug and made intense eye contact with Tony. "My family doesn't have any skeletons in our closets. And if we were truly cursed, how could I be killing it on the stage and screen right now? You don't reach this level of stardom without some cosmic vibes on your side." She started to laugh. Phoebe did, too. Phoebe leaned back and, with two fingers, plucked one of the fake warts off of Ramona's face. "Good point," Phoebe said. They finished packing up and waited for their keyboardist and bass guitarist. Eventually, Dustin and Amelia respectively returned. Dustin made a few bucks for helping the quartet. Amelia learned another way how not to seduce a woman. And they were off. "How about we put our stuff in the car and then come back to ride some of the rides?" Ramona asked Phoebe as they trudged toward the exits. "Can't we afford it?" Phoebe asked softly. "Oh yeah," Ramona said. They walked hand in hand. Before they got close to their destination, they heard a scream. There was a commotion in the distance. The crowd was separating. "What's going on?" Phoebe asked. "I don't know," Ramona said, "but it probably involves alcohol. Or teenagers. Or both." "Tony," Phoebe said, "what's happening? Do you see anything?" Tony, who was pulling a cart with his drum kit on it, was just as confused as Phoebe. "I don't see anything. We need to go." He sounded worried. He and Phoebe grabbed Ramona by her arms and started to drag her away from the crowd. "Tony, your drums," Ramona said, looking back at the cart he was leaving behind. "I'll come back for them," he said. "Let's get out of the way." As much as they tried, though, the crowd got thicker in front of them. It was almost like everyone around them was standing back, waiting to see what was about to happen. "Let us through," Tony said. The people in front of them looked at them as if they didn't know how to respond. "Let us through," Tony screamed. One of the men blocking their path, a big, burly guy, looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. "No," Tony said. "Please, let us through." When the man didn't budge, Tony pulled Ramona back to the left. "Where are we going?" Ramona asked. Tony didn't have an answer. He looked in every direction, but nothing he saw gave him any hope. Suddenly, both Tony and Phoebe stopped moving. For a moment, they both paused as if there was a sound only they could hear. "No," Phoebe said softly. She held onto Ramona tightly. "What are you two doing?" Ramona asked. She looked around the crowd. People were watching something that was making their way toward them. "We lost Emilio and Du," she started to say about her two absent bandmates. Then she saw what everyone was looking at. A woman in a black dress stumbled through the crowd. She wore a strange veil, but it had been pulled back over the top of her head, revealing a bizarre mask of some kind. "Help!" she screamed. "I need help. I need a hospital. No, I need a doctor, please. Take me away, please." Ramona was taken aback by the sight. People were watching, confused, and no one was trying to help. As the woman got near to people, they would see her face, and some would react by clapping their hands at the detail of her mask. It looked to Ramona like she had a mask made of snakes. No, it couldn't be a mask. It was some sort of latex prop glued to her face. No, the tiny snakes were wriggling as if they had been sewn right on her face, still alive. "Oh my God," Ramona said. The crowd reacted in different ways. Some looked horrified, some concerned. Still, some must have thought it was a very good costume. Glancing around the crowd, there were many people dressed for the occasion. None of them had a costume this convincing, however. Finally, one of the women in the crowd asked, "Is this real or is it part of the celebration?" Many of the crowd appeared interested in the answer. "I think it's real," a man said. As if waiting for permission, many in the crowd rushed forward, including a woman wearing a badge that signified she was a staff nurse working at the Centennial. "Ma'am," she said, not completely sure what she was supposed to be doing but eager to help. "Come here, ma'am. Let me take a look." The woman with the strange things on her face screamed out, "Help me. My name is Lillian Geist. I've been held against my will and I just escaped. I need help." Boos rang out through the crowd. Suddenly, their concern evaporated. "Oh, come on," a man in the crowd said with a laugh, "that's too far. Lillian Geist." "Wait." Suddenly, the color drained from the man's face. It wasn't just him. Many in the crowd took an instinctive step back. Gasps ran through the crowd. Lillian screamed, "Help me, please." Now, the crowd stood their ground and watched as Lillian fell down sobbing, ugly, tearless sobs. "Someone help her," Ramona said. She looked around at the people who just stood and stared. "Wait, is this real?" "Ramona," Phoebe whispered sharply. "Be quiet, please be quiet." Ramona looked around the large circle of people, confused as they did nothing. She was shy at first, unsure whether this was some kind of performance. Ramona saw a young child asking its mother what to do. The mother put a finger to her lips and whispered, "Just watch." The crowd was quiet. The entire Centennial celebration had gone silent except for the sounds of rides and machines. No people, even far in the distance, were making a noise. Ramona didn't know what to do. She stepped out toward the woman, and the people watched. "What is going on here?" she asked. No one answered except Phoebe, whose eyes were filled with tears. She mouthed something at Ramona but didn't speak. "This woman needs help," Ramona said quietly at first, but then repeated herself louder, This woman needs help. What are you all doing? Tony, what's going on? Ramona, he said as if it took great effort. He looked her in the eye. He was crying. And then, all at once, the sounds of the crowd in the distance returned. People screamed in joy on the rides. Then screams started up that weren't out of joy. They were screams of terror. Ramona turned in the direction of the cries. Just as she did, a large snapping sound could be heard, and, in the distance, the massive Ferris wheel started to tilt dramatically. "Oh my God," Ramona said. In the distance, something was burning. Interlude Ramona Part 2. "What's going on over there, Paul?" the voice on the radio called out. The voice had been asking about the misplaced mirror for several hours, but now it asked only about the loud booming in the distance and the commotion of crowds. Paul, who stood and watched, did not know what was going on. He was merely going about his day when, for no particular reason, he ran across the centennial celebration at high speed, pushed the festivity-goers out of his way, and stood at the edge of a large circle of people who were focused solely on a ranting, screaming woman who called herself Lillian Geist. But that wasn't possible. The Geists were dead. After the death of Jedediah Geist the day before, all of them were gone. Lillian, he thought. Which one was that? Oh, right, the beauty queen. The one who had broken her opponent's leg in order to get the crown. How was he supposed to know if this really was her? She was wearing a mask of some kind, maybe prosthetics. It wasn't easy to keep the peace on the anniversary with all of the costumes. Paul needed to step up and bring calm and order to the situation. Except he didn't. But why not? Was he scared? No, that didn't work. Paul was a larger guy. He wouldn't be afraid. Maybe he was just assessing the situation. Yes, that could be it. No need to rush things. The woman did not appear to be in danger or have any wounds to be attended to. He could merely assess the situation and stay where he was. At some point, though, he would have to step forward and get things under control. He held one hand on his pistol and the other on his radio, ready for action. He never actually did intervene. There was no telling why. In some strange way, he felt he was on his mark, right where he was supposed to be. Even as the young woman next to the alleged Lillian Geist pleaded with the crowd to help, Paul never left his mark. An explosion in the distance. No, not an explosion. It was the sound of a large structure breaking all at once. Paul turned to see what it was. "Oh, God," he said into his radio, the first thing he had said into it since running over here. The Ferris wheel broke loose. At that moment, everyone in the park started to panic. The concerned citizens in Looky-Loos lost all interest in that desperate woman who called herself Lillian Geist, all of them, except for the young woman with the red streak in her hair. Officer Paul stood his ground. He found himself yelling at people not to panic and to proceed in an orderly fashion toward the exit as the Ferris wheel started to roll freely into other park rides, knocking them loose from their fastenings and causing them to collapse. The people, of course, ignored his warnings. They ran and pushed and shoved without a care for the safety of those around them. Mothers took their children into their arms and ran, leaving strollers and purses behind. Teenagers temporarily left their rebellious phases and cried for help as they were pushed against guardrails and all manner of obstacles. Still, Paul, having found the place he was meant to stand, held his ground, waving people around as needed. Paul was a large man, after all, and his blue uniform was visible. He eventually managed to bring some semblance of order to the egress, as much as could be allowed. The woman, Lillian, still lay collapsed on the ground. The young woman, whose name he didn't know, tried to help her against the advice of her sister and bandmate. Paul didn't know how those people were related to her, of course. Paul was a local policeman, but he didn't know everyone. He only knew what he needed to know, and right now, he didn't have reason or explanation to know that Phoebe and Tony were desperately trying to get the nameless woman away from Lillian Geist. Those thoughts slid through his mind without making purchase. Eventually, the crowds cleared, and Paul could see one of the many things that people were running from. It was a man. Paul froze, not because some cosmic script had told him to. He was actually that afraid of what he was looking at. The man was even bigger than Paul. He was well built, and he was rebuilt with rusting metal that must have been poured onto his skin while still molten. The metal enveloped his torso and arms, creating jagged teeth that cut and poked the man as he walked. The left half of the man's face was burnt or gone, one of the first casualties of whatever accident had befallen him. Metal held firm to the man's empty left eye socket and cheekbones. It engrossed and encased his jaw on that side of his face. Paul feared for his life and the lives of those around him. Still, he did not leave his mark. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to have to ask you to put down the metal strut." Was it a strut? Paul couldn't be sure. It looked like it had come right off of the Ferris wheel. The color of the metal, the shape. But that wasn't possible because this metal was rusted to a sharp point. The Ferris wheel had looked practically new. The man did not answer. Paul looked in the distance and saw a trail of bloody corpses. He had not noticed how they had gotten there in the commotion, but he knew enough now. Blood dripped from the man's makeshift weapon. "I need backup near the haunted house and the funnel cake kiosk on the west end," he said. And that was the last thing he ever said. On the script, he was supposed to cry for his wife, but as the jagged, rusty piece of metal pierced his torso under his rib cage and exited up near his collarbone, he didn't say anything at all. His last thoughts were of his wife, though. And, in the mess that was his dying lamentations, he wondered to himself for the last time but not the first, "Why did I even come here?" Ramona tried to peel the poor woman off the ground, but the woman wasn't helping at all. She had given up. "Have I seen him before?" Lillian asked, dazed. "No, but surely I've felt him." "Can you feel the sinking feeling?" Ramona paused her efforts to help the woman and considered this. She looked back at the man covered in rusted metal and realized she felt a sinking feeling as if there was no hope. "You're just scared," she lied. "We're going to be okay. We'll get you." Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the police officer get skewered by the strange man. She screamed. "Let's go," Phoebe said. "We can go now, I promise." "Shh," Tony scolded Phoebe, who had said too much. Unlike the ill-fated officer Paul, they knew exactly why they were standing in those very spots. Ramona relented. She couldn't get Lillian off the ground. The woman was heavier than she looked. What was Ramona supposed to do? She decided to stand and make a run for it, but as she tried, the strap around her neck held firm. Lillian was holding onto her guitar bag. "Let go!" Phoebe screamed at Lillian. Lillian didn't let go. Instead, as Ramona tried to free herself from the grasp of the woman, Lillian looked her in the eye and said, "Maybe this is the only way out." Ramona, energized by a fresh spike of what the hell, pulled free from her guitar bag and left it to Lillian. Lillian got to her knees and waited as the die-cast walked slowly toward her. "It's you," Lillian said softly. On the script, a note asked if anyone knew what she meant by this, but no one had an answer. All she had meant was that she had finally met the savior who would save her from this life by sending her to death. As he approached Lillian, an explosion went off nearby. A propane tank at the funnel cake kiosk had suffered a catastrophic meltdown and blown. The kiosk was reduced to splinters and ash, but the haunted house attraction, one of those put together from pieces hauled to the location on the backs of large trucks, was hit by the blast so hard that it let loose from the fastening holding it down and fell forward, a flaming heap. It landed on Phoebe Mercer and Tony, who had moved ahead of Ramona for reasons even they didn't know. Ramona was just in the right place to avoid the falling structure. She let loose a scream. "Phoebe!" Ramona looked back at the metal-covered man. He lifted his rusty metal weapon and cleaved, in one swing, Lillian Geist's head from her body. With such force that both the head and the body were flung into the burning remnants of the haunted house attraction. The man looked at Ramona for only a moment and turned to leave. "Phoebe!" Ramona screamed. With all her might, she lifted the sheet metal panel off of the place where Phoebe and Tony were. There they were. Phoebe choked on her blood from underneath the metal girder. Tony had gotten struck in the head. He was beyond saving. Ramona approached the girder and attempted to lift it off of her crushed sister. It was no use. The metal didn't even budge. Thinking quickly, she grabbed a 2x4 to try and pry the metal structure off of Phoebe, but the board broke. Ramona got down as close as she could to her sister and reached out for her. The sound of her sister's labored breathing enraged her. She looked to the sky and said, "Where are you?" There was no answer. "Aren't you supposed to help us?" she asked. Her mother had always told her that the invisible man that haunted the Mercer line was a good guy, not a bad one. She closed her eyes and tried to feel for the presence of the invisible thing passed from one Mercer to the next. Her sister was always the one with the strong connection. Ramona was deemed a skeptic by her mother. "Help her!" Ramona screamed, but the Mercer poltergeist did not make an appearance. She looked back at her sister and realized that what she thought was breathing was actually some kind of spasm. There was no way Phoebe could be breathing. She was crushed. Her chest was almost flat underneath the girder. Ramona cursed at her useless family protector and got to her feet. At that point, the script had Ramona being aided by police and firefighters, but Ramona did not know of nor care for the script. She got to her feet and turned in the direction of the metal man. Anguish to anger was an easy transition for some. Ramona felt anger beyond anything she had ever felt. She knew that the man coated in metal was at fault. She could feel it, the wisps of destruction coming off his body like radiation. She rushed after him, to which the script noted, "Dear Kong will handle it. .. The man had no concern for Ramona. He didn't even turn his head as she pursued him. Everyone else, though, they were very concerned. People appeared out of nowhere. Entire crowds made a beeline for the festival grounds. They didn't approach her directly, but they did approach her. They filled in the space between her and her quarry like water taking the shape of its container. She dodged every person. Some even had the nerve to ask if she was okay. Some of these people were injured themselves, but they suddenly became very concerned about Ramona's well-being. She dodged them and picked up the pace. She wasn't going to let the man get away. He was only walking. Why was it so difficult for her to get near him? It didn't even make sense to her. He cleared a field in the distance, and then when she got to that field, it would take her even longer than it did him despite her running and him walking. She thought she was losing her mind. Still, she pursued. What would she do when she got to him? She didn't know. She must have pursued halfway across town. They ended up near the old Geist factory before she finally appeared to be gaining on him. When she thought she was near, he turned around. With one singed hand, he reached to the other and grabbed what she assumed was a wedding ring based on the finger it was attached to. He lifted it and dropped it into the grass. Then, he turned and continued on his path around the factory. Ramona's curiosity was piqued. Why drop a ring in that spot? What could it mean? She approached the place where he had dropped it quickly and looked down at the little gold ring, which had been melted and malformed but still held a small brown jewel. How odd. It was a simple ring, and the love it represented was buried in the past. She bent down and grabbed the ring on a ~P macron R macron right arrowhead == pi diaresis left arrowhead L degrees circumflexity 1 degrees left arrowhead right arrowhead 2 degrees. Degrees pi 1992, but when she stood back up, the sun jumped across the sky. It was getting dark on January 1, 1984. In the distance, she could hear men plotting. Interlude Ramona Part 3. Last part of the interlude. Ramona looked to where the terrible metal-covered man had been only moments earlier. He was no longer there. It felt as if she had been standing in that very spot for hours. Her joints were stiff, and she was parched. The voices continued. Where was the murmuring coming from? From her vantage point, she couldn't see anyone. She ducked down and looked around. They were 30 feet away from her, at least, yet she could hear them whispering as if she were far closer. Ramona had seen enough movies to know that if the plot required it, characters could overhear more than physics ought to allow, but she had no idea that she was in a movie. In fact, she had no idea she was in a different decade. Still, she couldn't help but listen. She was hidden from the view of the car as she crouched in the field behind a row of poorly trimmed bushes. Ignoring human speech is easy, but human whispers have a way of catching one's attention. "When is he supposed to get here?" one man asked. "Geist is telling him a new one about some movie scene," another voice said. He let the air out of Geist's town car's tires to make sure old Carlisle would need a ride. "If I'm right about Benson calling Daddy for help, Carlisle will be here soon." Carlisle Geist? Ramona thought. Everyone knew that Carlisle Geist was dead. What was the rhyme about the Geist deaths again? Middle school in Carousel was quite an odd experience. She tried to remember. __. Bart met his end, scared by his own shadow, lost in the night, alone in a meadow. Ellie fell in a well, left there did well. Tom got caught in a spell, rang heaven's bell. Children gone missing, some snatched in the night, vanished from beds, a community's fright. Eyes, they do say, was gnawed by a rat, in the asylum's halls, her habitat. Carlisle and Benson, with gears in a crash, in the factory's grave, they turned to ash. The rest were charred in the manor's fierce blaze, smoke, flames, and just deserts ended their days. Old Jed remains, with a grin ear to ear, he's outlasting them all, year after year. __. That was right. There were more, of course, though the deaths before Bartholomew were not as sensationalized. Carlisle Geist had died in a factory accident. She looked at the building in the direction the men were staring, a factory. The word Geist was painted on the building large enough that she could read it from where she was, even in the dying sunlight. That couldn't be. Ramona refused to believe the picture her mind was piecing together. What proof could she find, though? She listened further to the men as they sat in the car and repeated their plans over and over in different ways. If she didn't know better, it almost sounded like they wanted her to understand what was going on. That couldn't be it. If she had been thinking about movies, she might have called this lazy writing. Having men of ill intent speak their intentions in earshot of a hiding main character. She wasn't thinking of movies. She was thinking that these men had, to the best of her understanding, hired someone to burn down the factory. She couldn't believe they were after Carlisle Geist. He was dead. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. And then she saw the car arrive. It was a mid-size car, fairly well kept. It pulled up to the front entrance of the factory, and the passenger door opened. An older man with a cane stepped out. Did she recognize him? She couldn't tell in the distance. She had definitely seen Carlisle Geist before. He was famous when she grew up. He had been in a lot of Geist films, though he usually just did introductions for things like double features. She recognized the cane. That was his trademark accessory. What were the odds that this man carried a cane, just like Carlisle Geist? He walked into the building and the car that delivered him left. No, it wasn't leaving. It was coming in her direction. It ended up parking right next to the brown car with the men talking. A man stepped out. He wore a brown jacket and had a ratty goatee. "If he is still alive in the morning, I'll kill him myself," the man said as he slid into the back seat. As they spoke, she learned that he was a film director who hated Carlisle Geist for some petty reason or another. Then, after learning more than she could have hoped about these odd men, she saw them light a fire in a flask and then jump out of the vehicle as it smoked and spat. She practically crawled away from her hiding spot and ran down the street, hoping that they didn't see her. She needed to find a payphone or a newspaper stand or something to confirm that she wasn't going mad. Luckily, payphones and newspaper dispensers were a common sight in those days. She never did find something to prove she wasn't going mad. The newspaper told her the day's date, January 1st, 1984. Either this was the world's most elaborate prank, or she really was lost in time. Resolute, she called the fire department and told them there was about to be a fire at the Geist factory. After she called, she ran to find a place to watch everything go down. Eventually, she saw the man covered in metal walking toward the factory, but the adrenaline had worn off, and she did not dare approach him. Moments after he entered the factory, a fire started. Moments after that, The fire department arrived and evacuated everyone. All the while, Ramona fought off thoughts about her sister's fate, her chest crushed under the weight of a metal girder. She couldn't bear it. Having done her good deed, she needed to get back to the festival. This time, she walked, observing the world of the past. She had been 19 years old in 1984. She couldn't tell if everything was the same. Time was funny that way. Change happens slowly, and the past fades. Dates get blurry. By the time she arrived back at the town square, it wasn't 1984 anymore. It also wasn't April 12, 1992, the date of the real centennial, where her sister had died. It was March 15, 1993. She had been gone for nearly a year. The next few days were some of the strangest of her life. Officially, she was dead. Her name had even been etched into the side of a monument for those who had been killed. She slept in motels and abandoned houses while she planned on what to do next. It also turned out that Carlisle Geist hadn't died in the factory fire after all. No, he died later in a film set accident. She hadn't changed his fate. She had merely nudged it. During this time, she consulted a psychic, who led her to communicate with Jedediah Geist's spirit. She always hoped that she might find a way to change her sister's past like she had for Carlisle Geist. Even as Jedediah Geist rambled on and on about his understanding of Carousel, her hopes grew dimmer. The doomed spirit was little help to her. She dropped the fire poker that had been used to kill Jed in the house with so many other weapons as she left. All the trouble she went through to sneak it out of the cold case museum without being caught was for nothing. All would have been lost if it had not been for the man she found standing outside Jedediah Geist's home when she left her seance. "Good evening, Ramona," he said courteously in his deep voice, "or should I say morning, now?" He smiled warmly. She froze in panic. In the months since she had gotten back, she had not been recognized by anyone. It had almost been like they had been ignoring her. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Not of me, at least." But she was afraid because, in a strange way, she felt like she had seen him before. "The less I say, the less likely things go off track," he said. "Deja vu, yes?" She nodded. "For me as well," he said. "You take it well. Otherwise, this whole thing might have been trouble." "Where do I know you?" she asked. He chuckled. "I suppose you might recognize me because you paid attention in your history class. Silas Dearcon, in the flesh." He held out his hand. Ramona didn't shake it. Had she had this conversation before? "Yes, you have," he said. She took a step back. Had her intense curiosity not been triggered, she would have already run. "You were about to ask me if we had this conversation before," Silas said. "Yes. We have." "Did I?" "No, this is the only part you have to repeat anymore. We found the right preparations long ago. Trying to control a player is difficult. Trying to control you, doubly so. You all can't be controlled, only positioned." He was so familiar to her. Stepping out onto that porch and seeing Silas Dearcon. She had done that before. It wasn't until she took the step that she remembered it. "I failed," she said. "I don't remember what happened." "You were going to help me save my sister." Silas shook his head. "I wouldn't say you failed. For your part, you did wonderfully. But you aren't the only cog in this timepiece." Ramona could barely breathe as she took it all in. That moment in time took hold of her brain in a way she could not understand, even though she had lived through it many times before. "I'm sorry," she said, a tear falling down her cheek. She had yet to remember what she was sorry for except that she felt she had failed her sister. She never would remember the details. "There is no need to cry about past mistakes," Silas said. "Eternity is a hell of a thing to fall back on. Trust me." He turned and faced the overgrown path that led away from Jed's house. "Walk with me," he said, never looking back to see if she would. Of course, she did follow him. "You want me to do something, is that right?" she asked. "You want me to do something for you, and you will help save my sister." Silas held up a hand with a smile. "Language, my dear, language. I merely suggest that if you want to save your sister, there is a way it can be done. I suggested nothing of an official arrangement nor promise. Ramona suddenly remembered him having said that before. She strained to try to remember why that was. You don't make deals? She asked, trying to remember how he had described it before. I promise. You do not want me to make you a promise, he said with a laugh. They continued talking in their own odd way. Much of the conversation happened in Ramona's memories and continued into the present. Silas Dearcon was patient and had a good idea of where her train of thought was headed at any given time. They found themselves sitting on the park bench. It was when you tried to help Lillian Geist, he said. That was all the proof we needed. Then, when your actions got your sister killed, you chased her killer. That, too, took us aback. I got my sister killed? She asked. Silas sullenly responded, yes, you hold part of the blame, though I'll gladly take the lion's share. You couldn't have known what would happen, but if lack of foreknowledge were an excuse for consequences, no man would be liable for anything. Yes, you could have escaped with her then before the diecast arrived. We only wanted you there for the players to meet you, if only briefly, when their time came. You chose to try to help a stranger. That was very noble of you. You can never predict which person will overcome their casting. Ramona began to cry again. I'm sorry, she said. Wipe your tears, my dear Ramona. There will be time to cry later. Now is the time for me to tell you what you must do, Silas said sternly. He handed her a handkerchief so she could wipe her tears away. You want me to pick up the ring, she responded. She wrapped her arms around herself. She couldn't remember past that moment, the moment he told her what to do to save her sister. Over and over, right? Silas nodded. I don't remember what happens after that, she said. No, you wouldn't, he said. Free will is a strange thing. If you know what you did last time, you might be bound to it or repelled from it. Free will is a precious commodity in this place, and you ought never to give it away, not for promises or reassurances. When you rescue your sister, it must be you who does it if you wish to truly save her. Ramona sat in silence and watched as the sun rose. Silas watched with her. What aren't you saying? She asked. Even without her full memory, she knew a liar when she met one, even if he was well-spoken. He wasn't telling the whole truth. Most everything, he replied softly. She nodded. So I pick up the ring. You pick up that omen every day, he said. It's easier if we have you do it. Don't ask questions. It's political. You pick it up. Everyone will start preparing for a centennial. Save Carlisle Geist, just like you did before. We like that. If you do it every day, you will prepare the way for those who will come to help you. You'll be one of them. Every single day, the real centennial, your centennial, will be close to appearing. It may take them a few tries, but eventually, they will seek you out and help you whether they know that's what they're doing or not. When that happens, your sister can be saved. But no promises, she said. None at all, Ramona, Silas said. She didn't understand why he wanted that, but her memories of that moment compounded, and she knew he would explain no more. How long will I have to keep picking up the ring? She asked. You will do it every day until something unusual happens, he said. Don't you worry. Time will fly by when you aren't looking. Ramona's anger had faded to resolve. Her stomach filled with butterflies. Can't I succeed? She asked. Silas took in a deep breath. There have been successes before. Fleeting success, but success nonetheless. Those who are coming may be different. They are unorthodox. Carousel may hold a grudge against them. Who could say? I should warn you, though, there hasn't been a happy ending in Carousel yet. She furrowed her brow, but Silas didn't explain any further. But we have eternity to fall back on? Ramona asked. Silas laughed. That we do, he said. That we do. Chapter 61. The more Ramona spoke about her sister's death and Silas Dearcon, the more I felt like the entire tutorial was a row of dominoes or, better yet, a Rube Goldberg machine with 100 little pieces waiting to do their part, their ultimate purpose unknown. We were seeing behind the curtain how it was all being put together. The question we still had to answer was, why? Ramona definitely had a part, though I couldn't understand it at first. She entered the final storyline again every day, waiting for a team to come through and help her beat it. Strange. We talked about her upbringing in Carousel. She described a relatively normal life. Even after her mom and stepdad died, her life was normal, if a little rough. Of course, there were odd things. This was Carousel, after all. People going missing and legends of horrifying monsters were just a part of her life. They were normal to her. When we told her it was all fake, all orchestrated, that was still beyond what she was willing to accept even with everything she had seen. How do you explain Silas Dearcon, then? I asked. That part she was ready to talk about. Silas Dearcon is clearly some kind of genie or something. Maybe he is a crossroads demon. I know it sounds crazy, but I've heard stories about them existing, Ramona said. And I knew very well the crossroads demons existed. Dinah had beaten one at poker. We believe they exist here, Ant-Man said. But that's part of the reason this place is weird. I know something weird is happening, Ramona said. This place was normal once. To me, at least. It doesn't really feel the same anymore. Maybe that's just because Phoebe is gone. I don't know. Can we put a pin in this part? I asked. I don't mean to be rude, but you just said something that can't be true. You said Lillian Geist was killed by the guy covered in metal. Are you sure about that? Ramona nodded. If that woman with the things on her face was Lillian Geist, she definitely died. In 1992? I asked. Yes. So, are the Geists like ordinary NPCs that get revived at the end of their stories? I asked in frustration. The Geists were not normal for Carousel. They were not aware of their situation. They were not attached to the script, and they did not see the red wallpaper. These were all conclusions I had come to. I had assumed that they were basically normal people trapped at the mercy of Carousel. I thought they were different. We saw Lillian die in 1995 at the end of the last storyline. She couldn't have died in 1992. I mean, if Lillian can come back after dying in 1992 so she could live to die in 1995, why didn't the other guys come back? Ant-Man drank his coffee in one big gulp. It's a game, he said. Maybe you're hoping it's more than it is. Lillian Geist was alive for the last story because she was in that story. It can't be that simple, I said. Didn't you learn anything from this running all over town trying to figure things out? Ant-Man said. Maybe Carousel wants us to think that we can be clever enough to figure this whole thing out, but whatever it decides will happen, and we're just rats in a maze without cheese at the end. No, Ramona said. Mr. Dearcon talked about positioning players to try to manipulate them. If we can't find a way to succeed, why do that? I let loose a sigh. It was possible this whole thing was part of some mundane torture. I couldn't just accept that, though. Every day, you pick up the ring into your part for the storyline, I said. That sounded like an omen to me. A strange ring in the field would fit right in with Carousel's cursed collection. That meant there were multiple omens to enter the third storyline. We already knew that about the second storyline. Tell me again why Dearcon said to do that. Ramona shrugged. He said it would make people get ready for the centennial. No, actually, he always said they would get ready for a centennial. He said that you all would help me find the real centennial. He always said it that way. A instead of the. It had to have been on purpose. There were multiple centennials. We already knew that, more or less. The town had been preparing centennials forever. So the true ending is when we go to the original centennial in 1992, I said. The generic ending is the centennial that the town has been setting up. That sound right? Which would mean. Wait, every day you pick up that ring, is it always the anniversary of Jedediah Geist's death? Ramona nodded. It's always the anniversary of his death after I get back from 1984. Sometimes after I've saved Carlisle Geist, I do the ritual and talk to Jed. He only talks about his life and his family. That's how I know what I know about Carlisle and the others. Plus a bunch of asking around. And one started laughing. We all did it one by one. It was you the whole time. And one said. What? Ramon asked. I felt both relieved and a little ashamed for not having predicted it. The continuity loop wasn't time travel, we figured that out on the first day, and it wasn't reality warping, either, with a few exceptions. The continuity loop was Carousel's script forcing all the NPCs to prepare for the Centennial every day. We didn't know why it was happening, what was causing it, or how to stop it. The reason the loop existed was simple. Ramona had been picking up that ring every day. Something about the plot of the third storyline required it to be both the anniversary of Jedediah Geist's death and the day before the Centennial. When Ramona triggered the storyline every day, it became that. The diecast was a huge story that spanned time and space. My location scout trop told me this story could go all over town. Silas Dearcon recruited you to cause a continuity loop for, well, the last 30 years, I said. Just saying it felt odd. Ramona said, time skipped forward for me. It feels like it's been over a year, maybe, but not decades. I don't know how any of this works, Ant-Man said. There was no loop or whatever when we got here. Even with the ring, time is not what we think it is here. It's all pretend. That part was true. The Througline acted as if it had been waiting for players for 30 years. That was just for the story. Who could say what Ramona had experienced? Maybe it actually had been 30 years in some manner of timey-wimey nonsense. Maybe Ramona existed as some sort of magical save state they could restart whenever they wanted. Who knew? Ramona asked about how things had been when we got here. Antoine explained it to her. Anna would have been better, I thought. Kimberly also. Antoine was trying to be too vague about the your hometown is literally our best approximation of hell, part of the explanation. Anna would have navigated it better. Damn, Ramona said after we got to the end. Antoine had left out specifics of the stories we had played through. It was probably for the best, as one of them featured other Mercers. We talked further for a few hours. It wasn't long before the sun was up and bright, and a well-dressed man who would one day be mayor came by to get our attention. He didn't come inside. Instead, he waved for us to follow him out behind the diner. You had better stay here, I said as Ramona tried to follow us. Why? She asked. You all are supposed to help me. I don't know if you were on screen while calling for emergency services, but if you were, it would be really weird if you were suddenly helping the same people you just thwarted. He's right, Ant-Man said. Gotta play our parts. I didn't know if I was right, but there was a risk. That being said, if she were caught on camera, it would be easy enough for Carousel's editor to just cut that part out of the final film. I didn't want to try to play around that just yet. Ramona held up her hands in surrender and returned to the booth. Time to get into character. I had to put myself in the head of a pervy director who wanted his boss dead for asinine reasons. An action. _. Last night went worse than I could have hoped, future Mayor Gray said as we rounded the back of the diner. I talked to some of my contacts. They say someone warned the fire department of the fire. They say it was a woman who had heard men talking about hiring someone to burn down the factory. I was happy with my decision to keep Ramona away. I just hoped he hadn't seen her when he waved to us. That had been off-screen, so we were probably in the clear. That was a bad break, I said. Or maybe we got lucky. That curse or whatever we did wasn't just going to kill the guys. Exactly, Ricky Zaragoza said. He had been behind the diner waiting. My brother would not have wanted this. He was not some crazed killer. What was that about? He asked, looking at Cassie. You didn't tell us anything about that. Cassie tried her best to play her part while wearing the flamboyant getup she had been wearing for her role as a shady psychic. Look, I tried to warn you 7 ways to Sunday, but you all heard what the flask could do, and you stopped listening. You told us the curse would be under our control, Ricky said. It was the thing we were so excited about. We didn't know it would kill anyone in its path. Cassie didn't seem ready to respond. I wasn't sure how much knowledge she had actually managed to acquire about the flask or the die-cast before being thrust on screen. Isaac tried to help out. Look, you said we could only use it to target one person at a time. That's what we told it. Why didn't it work? He had helped her. One person at a time? She asked. Wait, I told you it could be used to kill one person. What do you mean at a time? Did you give it more than one target? I almost laughed. I didn't really like our characters in this one. It was almost funny that we had messed up. I wasn't there when you gave them the warning, I said. I turned to the future mirror. You sent that thing after the whole Geist family tree, Roderick. Every one of them. Cassie cursed. No. Roderick said. This is not my fault. You said one at a time. I swear you did. No, she didn't, Ant-Man said. She said one target. Roderick did not like being the butt of criticism. What's the difference? I told it to kill one at a time. The oldest living Geist and nobody else. That's one target. Cassie rolled her eyes. I don't even know what you've done. I need to talk to Celia. She knew more about the spirit of vengeance than I ever did. I don't know what's going to happen now. I told you how to do it. How did you mess this up? You do a ritual, kill a target. Do a ritual, kill a target. One ritual, one target. No one has ever messed up that part. You asked it to kill a bunch of people one at a time. You moron. So that was the premise, huh? A gang of idiots messes up a revenge spell and lets loose some kind of supernatural slasher. I could work with that. Kinda wished I wasn't one of the idiots, though. Why's it matter? Isaac said. It failed. It's gone now. Gone? Why do you think it's gone? Cassie asked. It burned up, Isaac said. He almost said too much. His character wouldn't know the die-cast had stayed in the fire. We did because Carousel had shown us its point of view. Fire's gone. Right on cue, the back door to the restaurant burst open, and a cook jumped out, carrying a skillet that was burning to high heaven. He tossed it on the ground under a water spigot and turned the spigot on. The skillet had grease, so the water made the fire worse at first. It spat, boiled, and roared, and the cook himself was singed. Damn thing, he said. Damn thing just won't go out. We watched as the flames grew and taunted us, almost as if alive. The water could not quench them, not for at least 10 seconds. Then, with a hiss, it finally subsided to nothing but greasy water. Everyone was alarmed. We weren't acting. It's a sign. The die-cast shall run its course, Cassie said. I'm going back to tarot cards. This is too much. It's your fault, Roderick said. You didn't warn us well enough. It's your fault. You told us we could control it. You could control it, Cassie said as she started walking away. One ritual, one target. That's how you control it. Fuck. Ricky Zaragoza screamed. He was on the verge of tears. Roderick, what are we gonna do? I gotta go find something. I need something. He started padding through his pockets and then went out to Roderick's brown car and jumped into the back seat. I could only imagine what he was doing out there. Roderick looked scared and angry. It's not our fault. She should have told us. She didn't say it would do this. I imagined he was right. Cassie might not have even known. More than that, Cassie had a trap that would have debuffed anyone who didn't heed her warnings. She likely hadn't warned them well enough. Then again, if she had warned them, there might be no story. Chapter 62 Living in Carousel was odd in so many ways, but the thing that stuck out the most to me wasn't the constant feeling of impending doom or the mysterious residents. It was the petty thievery. Everywhere we went, we found ourselves reaching out and grabbing things we wanted and shoving them in our bags. Chapstick for sale at a neighborhood newspaper stand. Better grab it. Hand sanitizer in the bathroom at the diner? I think I'll take it. Pillow from the nice hotel we stayed at. It goes in the bag. Pillows don't weigh much and our magical luggage tags only cared about weight. Unfortunately for me, I had used my luggage tag in my hoodie pockets, which made pillow pilfering impractical. Still, I always had everything I needed with me. Off-brand candy bars from the hotel minibar. Mine. Carousel demanded coin for items at its special stores like the Psychic Emporium or the pawn shop. Even the Eternal Savers Club took money for bulk purchases unless you beat the storyline there. Set dressing, though, it could be pillaged cautiously. Roxy was said to have been so good at stealing from storyline sets that watching her go through movies was like watching a spy get chased through an open-air bazaar. She picked up a scarf here and sunglasses there. Before you knew it, she had a total wardrobe change between scenes. I mostly used thievery to get toiletries, candy, and batteries for my off-brand Walkman. That was what I was thinking about as I woke up over a month after the factory fire. It hadn't actually been a month, but the calendar said it had. February 12, 1984. The set disaster would soon be upon us. I was sleeping on the couch of my character's rented home, looking toward the Carousel Hills, not quite in the Carousel Hills, but the upper middle-class neighborhood closest to it. Yes, my character had an overpriced, modernist home that would make a miniature Bond villain proud. It was one of those places with a flat roof and glass walls. I hated it. We lived in a horror movie hellscape. I couldn't leave lights on because I knew I was getting stared at by things that went bump in the night. I couldn't sleep in the bedroom of the house either because that was where Ramona slept. She liked to have a locked door between herself and the world at night. I didn't blame her. She was a nice enough roommate, but we weren't friends yet. When we talked, it was friendly but distant. As odd as she was to me, I was even odder to her. The couch I slept on was on the second story, and I got a great view of the open wilderness. I didn't see much of Ramona. I could hear her strumming on a guitar in the bedroom below my couch pretty regularly. It was my character's guitar, but it didn't look like he played much. Like most of his possessions, it was meant to suggest a rich and fulfilling life that I didn't believe he actually had. He was shallow, even for an NPC. As I stretched, I rubbed my hand over my face and jolted awake at the realization that something was there that shouldn't have been. It was dark outside. Glancing at the wall-sized clock in his house, I saw that it was 3 in the morning. I felt around my mouth and chin. It was a goatee. I had a goatee. What the heck, Carousel? Where was my hoodie? I hoped and prayed I had stolen more shaving cream recently. I was going to need it. A month before I woke up with new facial hair, I was just coming to terms with how the storyline was going to work. Much of the time between the fire and the film set disaster was spent actually making the movie for Carlisle's production company. I had a shooting schedule in my car, along with my house key and a complete itinerary for making the film. I had to actually do work for this story. Kimberly appeared in her trailer, the kind movie stars get on film shoots, the day of my first shoot. I was nervous as heck when I arrived, and all eyes were on me. I had a whole team of NPCs at my beck and call. Carousel really wanted me to make the flick. We were in the production lot shooting on a sound stage that contained an entire neighborhood and the impression of a forest behind the houses. This place was recycled for different movies. Today, we were shooting the inside shots for the scene Carlisle and I had discussed previously, the heroine talking to her mother as the killer stalked outside. "Gather around, people," one of the NPCs said. Her name was Beverly. She was the film's assistant director. As the cast and crew gathered, I saw Kimberly stagger out of her trailer and take in her surroundings. An NPC urged her to join the huddle. When she saw me, a calm came over her. Beverly, the assistant director, continued calling people over to herself. Then, she said, "Everyone, this is Riley Lawrence, our new director. Everyone give him your attention." Then they all turned to me. Wait a second, wasn't my character already the director? We weren't on screen, so I guess that was okay, but it was weird to introduce me when I had already directed the first part of the movie. Whatever. What was I supposed to say? Folks, we all know what we're doing. We're going to all hit it hard and get things done on schedule, I said, willing it into existence. Now, let's get ready for the shoot. Has the new script been distributed? It will be soon, Beverly said. No sooner did she say it than an assistant of some kind came from an office in the distant corner of the lot and started distributing the rewritten version of the scene I had talked to Carlisle about. The pages said I had rewritten them. I didn't remember doing that, but the end result was pretty close to what I would have done. "All right, people," I said, looking over at Kimberly. "We're going to take 10. They obeyed, giving Kimberly and me time to talk. "This is the movie set," Kimberly said. "The news article about the film set accident, do you think that's what this is?" She was a little behind. "It isn't right now," I said. "But it will be." We were barely into the party phase. She didn't know of everything that had happened the day or so before at the factory. I did my best to explain it to her. "We're off-screen," she said. "The NPCs are still in character." It was strange enough. We were off-screen for all of this. Scenes that wouldn't make the final film were usually just not done at all. It would be a few moments before I realized the reason. Carlisle was on set. He had to be. The guys seemed to be unaware of Carousel's nature. The NPCs didn't turn off around them. It was that simple. Everyone was in character around the guys. "The guys are living the plot of the Truman Show," I said. "We can't let them know this is all fake or I don't know what will happen." "I've heard of the Truman Show," Kimberly said. "Was it a horror movie?" "Yes," I said. "Just in disguise." "I'm an actress?" she asked. She was taking it all in and trying to project calmness. Still, it was a lot to be told all at once. "Yes. I told Carlisle you're good, so do your best," I said. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath. "You know I was in an ad on YouTube once." "I didn't know that," I said. "It was for a skin cleanser. They wanted us to film ourselves using it. I shot a whole demonstration. They only used a shot of it where my face was covered in suds," she said. "I hated that cleanser. It was sticky." I said. Our lives back in the real world were so far behind us I had forgotten about Kimberly's whole mini-influencer thing. "If Carlisle asks, tell him you've been in more than that. There is a headshot over in the office with your films on it. He's also seen at least some of our storyline performances." "Thanks," she said. "Wait, which storyline?" "The Underground Lab one, subject of inquiry, is all I know." I guess he was told it was a real movie. She nodded nervously. I couldn't blame her. I was nervous, too. Normally, knowing the audience is watching was something you could push out of your mind. Heck, I was so angry at them for whatever role they played in getting us stuck here that I didn't care if they were entertained beyond what was required for our survival. Carlisle was different. I felt nervous about whether he would like my work. It felt so unlikely. I had only worked on a few student films back in college, and those were just assigned projects. Directing a real fake movie was a huge step up. "Riley," Carlisle called from the distance. He sounded hoarse. "Mr. Geist," I said. "I was wondering where you were." "Crawling out of 1,000 tons of molten metal," he said. "Metaphorically, if not literally." "How's the script? Did you get that scene rewritten?" I nodded and handed him my copy of the revised script. He started reading it immediately. Kimberly and I just watched as he tore through page after page. "Wonderful," he said. "Now, if the rest of the script gets this treatment, I think we'll be onto something." "This is Miss Madison," I said. "Our leading lady." "Kimberly Madison, of course," he said. "You will have to forgive my manners. I have a one-track mind sometimes. I am very excited to see what you can do." "So am I," she said. "I've got to go run my lines. If you'll excuse me." She made a beeline for her trailer. Some NPCs pointed her out like she was a celebrity. "I will see you on set. I am expecting a phone call about that nasty business last night," Carlisle said. He wandered off with my copy of the script. Moments later, that same assistant from earlier returned and placed a new copy in my hand. Carousel was always watching. "Now remember, Kimberly," I said. "We can't hear what you're saying in this shot. We are focusing on the shot from the outside. You'll sound distant. You'll be doing all of your acting with your face and your body here." Kimberly nodded and took a deep breath. "Action," I said. Kimberly started talking on the phone to her character's mother. I was down beneath, getting a visual of the scene from near the camera. Funnily enough, I could see what the cameras saw on the red wallpaper. My director's monitor drop didn't mention that ability. It was funny. That was technically what a director's monitor was for. Carousel, or at least whoever made the tropes, had a sense of humor. "What are you thinking?" Carlisle asked as the scene went on. The camera was being moved around, following the path the killer would take. "We're playing this like she's nervous about the big dance," I said. "I'd like to try it where she is confident. I mean, she doesn't know she is being watched yet. I would like to see her excited but self-assured as she looks into the mirror." "Let's try it," Carlisle said. So we did. We tried that and a dozen other ideas I had. Carlisle could afford the film because money was nonsense in this dimension. We put a camera where the mirror was. We ran it again. Kimberly did very well. She was always the best actor on the team. Time flew. I wasn't even sure that it was because of Carousel's magic. I watched as Kimberly worked. We shot some of the scenes of her character realizing she was being watched. Kimberly was very good at being afraid. I supposed we all were. Looking afraid was the most natural thing in the world. That's how Kimberly and I spent the next few months. She really was a star. Carlisle was truly impressed. We had to reshoot some of the scenes of the house and Kimberly's mirror scene over again on location in northern Carousel. This time, we were shooting the real house, having the camera stalk around like the killer. Kimberly was mostly just standing around in case she came into view for those scenes. We shot chase scenes running through the woods. We shot fight scenes. We shot Kimberly kissing her character's romantic interest right before he was disemboweled. Carlisle yelled cut. That was my job. I felt ashamed for having disappointed him. "The scream is weird," he said. "It doesn't have an identity. Every scream queen should have an arsenal of screams. This is too generic." He wasn't wrong. I thought for a moment. Kimberly took the critique in stride, though I could tell she felt bad for messing up. "We should do it in stages, then," I said. "First, she screams out of pure terror. That's stage one. Then, starting after the chase to the docks, she screams not out of fear but for help. She's trying to attract attention. Then, in the finale, she screams not out of fear but out of rage. The final stage." Carlisle considered this. "Like a Valkyrie," he said. I nodded. "Kimberly," I said. "You got that?" She nodded. "So this scene would be a scared scream, right? Cram those guts back inside that guy," I said. "We have another take. We'll do one for practice, okay? Then we do the real one." Kimberly smiled at me for some reason. The scene was reset, and away we went. We shot more scenes in the finale. Ramona still hung out around my character's house. She had chosen to go home with me because she knew my character lived in a good neighborhood due to her years of research. We only spoke about basic things. Food. Work. The meaning of free will. Normal roommate stuff. During that time, I didn't see Antoine, Cassie, or Isaac. I was confident that they were out there doing scenes and exploring the world of the story. They were just doing it away from me. I wasn't on screen much. When I was, it was with Kimberly. She was likely a main character. Antoine was, too. I hadn't seen Dinah. I had only seen hints of Bobby. There was a shoot coming up with a killer attacking Kimberly, but she cleverly unleashed some hounds on him. I assumed he was the guy providing the hounds to production. Time would tell. The needle on the plot cycle barely pushed forward. This version of the storyline was designed for people who had tried it before. It was doing all kinds of things that would freak out newbies. Carlisle was enjoying himself. We got to talking a lot, the two of us. He would regale me with tales of movies past. Stories about his father's era of filmmaking. He laughed and spoke fondly of his early years. He never mentioned being the CEO of any of the companies he had run. He resented being forced to take care of those businesses. Having money doesn't mean you can do anything you like, he said with a distant gaze. There's always something going on that gets in the way. Perhaps that was the trap Carousel had set for him. All the money in the world and no time to spend it doing what he loved. That wasn't the worst fate, but unhappy rich people are a staple of cinema. Maybe we like movies about miserable rich folks out of the form of schadenfreude. Maybe it was just because, all else being equal, we didn't want to be reminded of our own financial misery. We watch sad, rich people because it's a form of escapism. And people did watch Carlisle. Someone did, at least, because his life never stopped. There was always something going on, traffic accidents, dramatic arguments between lovers, things were always happening. Once, a man with a taste for narcotics bumped into him when we went out to lunch. He recognized the man as an old school friend. That was what his life was. Drama. Tension. The longer I spent with Carlisle, the more I understood Jet just wanting to get away from it all. Eventually, Carlisle told me he was taking a week at a spa in the West. He would be back to help shoot the finale, he promised. Of course, that week never happened to me. I woke up a week after our conversation. Time skipped like a child at recess. Carousel had given me a puny little goatee to show time had passed. I got up from the couch and found my itinerary and confirmed time had passed. I had drawn little red X's on all of the days that passed without my knowledge. I kept touching the facial hair over and over. I didn't like it. It was itchy, and there was no way it looked good. Why had Carousel made me grow it? I took my time, though, because as I walked to the restroom, I realized I was on screen. First blood was near, but not near enough. Still, I got a chill down my spine. My character was minor. I could easily be killed before first blood, and then my body could be revealed later. That was something I had not considered possible before. It felt like something that would need a special drop to happen. I hadn't gotten a look at the enemy yet, so as I tiptoed through my terrible rented abode, I felt inevitable death in my future. I made my way to the upstairs bathroom because its light was on for some reason. On the way, my hoodie, or at least the jacket Carousel had replaced it with, was hanging in the closet. I grabbed it and put it on. I didn't want to die wearing nothing but boxers. My jeans were crumpled on the floor. On those went. My shoes were near the door. Why didn't I keep them nearby? I continued stroking my strange facial hair. I glanced in the bathroom. I saw a metal razor on the counter near the sink. Carousel was being clear. It wanted me to shave. I wanted to shave, too, but I was hoping to do it off-screen. A loud ring sounded. It was the phone. My character had a landline with one of those long cords from the olden days. I answered. "Hey, Riley," Kimberly said on the other end. "Kimberly," I said. "What's up? Do you remember that scene where my character tries on clothes near some windows?" she asked. "Yes. And the killer is watching from outside." "Yes. I was thinking that was a really good scene, and we should do something like that again. I mean, not that, but something like that. It was a really spooky scene, you know." "I know what you mean," I said. "Really made the character menacing. You understand what I mean, right? Not that scene, but something like it. Can you see what I mean?" she asked. She was laying it on thick. She saw something. I knew she saw the killer's point of view right then, just as I had seen the killer on the red wallpaper at the factory. The killer could probably see me right then, but I couldn't see them because of the light being on inside. I hoped Ramona stayed in her room. I knew what Carousel wanted. It just so happened I wanted it, too. If I could get a glance at the enemy, I could finally get a good idea of what it was up to. That was the offer being made. I get a look at the enemy's tropes. Carousel gets. What, exactly? A chance to kill me? A tense scene? Maybe it just wanted to say hello after a long hiatus. I walked across the bathroom slowly. The sink and mirror were in a stupid place, right in the corner of the room next to two windows. The bath and toilet were not visible from the outside, but the sink was. I walked up to the sink and made sure to keep an eye on the mirror. The killer watching from outside was just so scary, Kimberly said. I gotcha, I said. I looked down at the sink counter and saw the razor and a little canister of shaving cream. I would be stealing those. Yeah, I said. We're going to have to do another scene like that real soon. Tobe continued. Thanks for listening.